Joining us now is Stephen Rowe, the Deputy Director at the Leadership Institute and the former Editor-in-Chief at Turning Point USA. Stephen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So before we dive really into the topic, and I kind of want to pivot back to the elections a little bit because that's what everything comes back to.
Absolutely.
What is your take on necessarily the Trump administration's approach when it comes to Iran, whether it be the nuclear deal or the killing of General Qasem Soleimani?
That's a great question, and it's been very consistent for the Trump administration across the board, whether it's Iran or any other countries, that we're putting America first. And that really puts countries like Iran on notice when they see America is no longer living in a gray area. You know how the Trump administration feels and how they are trying to operate in the international stage. And I think it puts a lot of leaders in Iran in a very scared position, and they try and puff their chests. But you see that America is strong, stronger than ever, and internationally we are here to win.
And when it comes to Iran, too, I think that situation brings up an interesting kind of development within the Republican Party, is that you have one wing that's long been accused of being the neocons, if you will, the John Boltons. That's the criticism that critics often lob against conservatives. But it seems like right now they've kind of pivoted to a more isolationist stance. That's what you see with President Trump a little bit. He doesn't want to use military force. He doesn't want to go into these countries. He's using a maximum pressure campaign using sanctions. And in fact, we hear Tucker Carlson on Fox News, one of the loudest supporters of the president, kind of voicing that isolationist stance. Is that where the party now stands?
Yeah, I think the party is coalescing around Trump's ideas, though, here, where we see empirically when we're moving troops and letting them come home to America, and when we unleash them, they're going to attack with the full force and fury that the United States has to offer in terms of our military. We're there to win. We're not there to sit around, and we're not there to play games. And I think the Trump administration is hitting the nail on the head in that arena. And I think a lot of Republicans, especially, are seeing the fact that when we bring troops home, less tension may occur, and more people are falling in line with the Trump doctrine, so to speak. And the evidence shows for itself that it's working and America's back on the international stage.
And dating back to 2016, too, the president made a campaign promise that he would try to pull troops out of Iraq, out of Afghanistan. It looks like right now they are kind of moving forward with that effort as negotiations with the Taliban continue. And then you have the 2020 Democratic field right now, too, and they're going to have a big obstacle is kind of coming over the foreign policy achievements of the Trump administration. You could look at the killing of the ISIS leader, top al-Qaeda officials, General Qasem Soleimani. Is this going to be a bigger campaign issue than most people are giving it credit for?
You know, I think that the biggest campaign issue for the Democrats is trying to stop President Trump, and it is not working, especially when it comes to his international and foreign policy credibility now, which is just very, very high. You saw the night that Soleimani get killed, that they were siding with not America first, but the opposite side. In fact, instead, when Trump's putting America first, the other Democratic candidates may be more likely to blame America first for their actions. When you're showing the strength of the American military, you're taking out one of the top generals in Iran. You are showing that we are putting them on notice. And unfortunately, the Democratic side, it's really difficult when you look at their foreign policy because they are all over the place between Bernie and Bloomberg. And it's very tricky. And if you're the average voter right now wondering what the international policy stance is for any of these candidates, you're scratching your brain a little bit because there really hasn't been an answer from them, because their answer is stop Trump and not even talking about these important issues like foreign policy, which is 50% of what the president's supposed to do in the first place. And it's crazy to me that most people, if you ask the average person on the street, they would be unable to tell you what this specific candidate, insert Democratic candidate here's foreign policy stance is. That is not a good look for them and doesn't look good going into 2020.
And then when it comes to domestic issues as well, I mean, we know that the economy is going to be a big issue going into 2020. But then it seems like when these candidates on the Democratic side kind of start struggling a little bit, they pivot to this issue of gun control. And I know it's something that you've spoken about in the past. I have to look at the examples of Beto O'Rourke, for example. I mean, he ran his campaign on that, and he eventually crashed and burned, I mean, in a figurative sense, when it came to that issue. And then you see right now Mike Bloomberg. He's kind of surging in the polls right now, and he's a very much so gun advocate. He's the Everytown backer, one of the biggest gun control groups in the entire country. Joe Biden right now is struggling as well. He's made a lot of comments on that as well. Is the Second Amendment just a losing issue when it comes to voters?
You know, I think the Second Amendment is a winning issue when it comes to the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. They've been very good on it. And in contrast, what you see is Michael Bloomberg, who, by the way, as you just mentioned, is rising like a phoenix in the polls and is championing that specific gun legislation. I don't think that carries past the Democratic primary. I think most people, when they look at the Constitution, when they look at what their values are, they tend to side with having the right to own a firearm. A good example of this is actually what just happened in Virginia, which is essentially covered by the Democrats right now. They They run both the House and the Senate and have the governorship. And even then, they were unable to pass that significant gun legislation. And if that's happening on the small scale, if we extrapolate that a little bit and get larger on the United States of America, time and time again, you see that these gun confiscation efforts really fall flat. And unfortunately, it's a losing issue for Democrats, but it's not one that they're going to put down by any means. I definitely forecast them really playing that largely in the oncoming election cycle, but I don't think it's going to be as successful as they hope. That's for sure.
Yeah, Eric Swalwell is another name that I should have mentioned before. And I guess as far as Michael Bloomberg
Yes,
goes,
and he's already dropped out.
he's already dropped out in a very
definitely.
dramatic fashion.
He's
if I
already
may
dropped
say so.
out.
And we may get our first glimpse at Mike Bloomberg, too, if he were to appear on the debate stage. His campaign says that they will. We're yet to hear any confirmation on that. But Stephen Rowe,
That's going to be awesome to watch.
that will be good TV, to say the least.
Yes.
Stephen Rowe, thank you very much for joining us tonight.